reminded that it's not always going to be like this. This is a temporary season, and God is going to bring you up out of that place, and what you're going to walk into is better than whatever you felt like you lost. Hello family, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're going to talk about how to get yourself out of a funk. Whether you've been through a crazy life transition or you just haven't been feeling like yourself lately, this video is for you. I'm going to talk about some of the practical steps that I took to get myself out of that place and some things that you can do as well. About 6 or 7 months ago, I went through a huge life transition where I actually got laid off of my job, and I didn't see it coming. I was very shocked, and it sent me into this spiraling mental place where I was very frustrated. I was kind of depressed for the first 2 months, and I knew that I couldn't stay in that place, but I didn't necessarily know how to get out. And so over the past 6 months, I've been doing a lot of healing work. And during the first 2 months of that process, it was really hard because it was kind of like, at this point in my life, I was just like, wow, God, I was really not anticipating this to happen, but I know and I trust your plan. But I kind of fell into this funk where, because I didn't have this strict schedule that I'm used to following, I kind of fell off on a lot of my routines and habits, and it was a very difficult time for my mindset. And so I got to this point and I was like, I cannot continue to stay in this place where I'm down and I'm kind of, sleeping more than usual and just eating all crazy. A lot of the things that I used to do, I just stopped doing because it was a really hard mental time for me. But I said, okay, you know what? At some point, you have to get up and you have to make do with what's in your hands. And so I decided to stop being a victim, and God really showed his hand in such a mighty way. I mean, the way he's been providing for me over the past few months has been mind-blowing, things that I could not ever take credit for. And it's been such a beautiful journey, and I've received so much rest during this time. And it really allowed me to figure out what exactly I want to do. And I don't think I've ever had time to really think that through. So I say all that to say, like, if you're in a funk or you're in a place where you feel like you should be further than you are by now, or you feel like you're beating yourself up because, you fell off of your routine or you fell off your habits, and it's okay. Like, sometimes it's really hard to get back to those places. So again, I want to walk you through some of the things that I did during that time. So the first thing that I did was I had to sit down with myself and have a real mindset shift. I spent a lot of time being very anxious and worrying, of course, about how I was going to pay my bills and, what's going to come next and all these other things. And I feel like as I began to reflect and sit with God, I had to learn how to focus on what I could control and leave the rest in prayer. There is no point as a believer that you should be so bogged down with anxiousness and just worry, because the Lord literally tells us to be anxious for nothing. And I think sometimes when you're in that place, like, you don't even want to hear certain things because your mind is so blocked. And so for me, I really had to study that, and it tells us to not only be anxious for nothing, but also to tell the Lord what we need, to bring our prayers and our supplications to him. And then it says that the peace that surpasses all understanding will be with us, and he will make the answers known to us. And so I began to say, okay, you know what? I cannot control how long I'm going to be in this season of my life. I cannot control, where things are going to come from. But I can take this time to say, okay, you know what, Lord? I know that you are with me, and I'm going to focus on what you've already placed in my hands. So I had already been building a business behind the scenes, and I was working on it during the time that I was full-time. But I felt like, even during the time when I was working, the Lord was shifting me into something new, and I really just wasn't ready. Like, it was very ahead of schedule. So I said, you know what, Lord, I'm going to go back to the things that you told me to work on. And I began to work on my offerings. The Lord had me to write another book, so I'm in the process of that. And I think sometimes we forget about the things that the Lord has called us to birth when we are so focused on, working, all these other things, right? Understandably, like, you work to make money. But I think sometimes, depending on how much your workload is, some of your God projects can kind of get put on the back burner. So this really allowed me to push those things forward. So I began to use what was in my hand. I began to work on those projects, but it started with a mindset shift and saying, I am no longer going to focus on the things that are outside of my control. You will worry yourself into a funk if you don't learn how to release what is not in your control. There are practical things that we can do. There are things that we can move ourselves through. But a lot of this stuff is really God's timing and, his way of moving. And you never know why you're in a season, but it's best to just kind of, again, focus on what you can control and leave the rest in prayer. God knows what he's doing, and he's not going to leave you in this place, and you just never know what's on the other side of it. Now, once I made that mindset shift that I was only going to focus on what I could control, I had to start doing some practical things to even get the desire or really build the discipline to start getting back to those routines and those habits that I was doing before. And so the first thing I did was I had to start getting out the house more. Now, working 100% remotely, even in my last job, it was kind of hard to I didn't really have to leave the house for anything except to get groceries because I was constantly working, and I like working from home. But I realized that the longer I stayed in the house, the more it affected my mental health. And so I made it a practice to start working in different cafes, and it was hard. There were some days where I had to literally pray for strength to just leave the house, or just pray for even the desire to get out of that environment. But the more I began to leave the house, I started taking, walks in the mornings. I even made it a point to not get the food delivered, but actually go and get my food. Those little things really do help you, because something about being outside of that environment, it really does shift the way that you see things. It gives you a lot more energy. So if you're in that place and you're in that funk where you just feel like you don't know what you're going to do, or you're very overwhelmed and anxious, get out the house. I don't care if it's just for a few minutes while you go get a snack, or you just have a few minutes to go take a walk. Go get out of the house. It may not feel good when you first get there, but by the time you finish and you continue to build it, it's going to make a big difference, and it's going to start giving you that desire to go. So once I started gaining the energy to begin to get out of my house and take regular walks, I also started to establish a morning and a nighttime routine. I realized that one of the things that helped me to feel like myself was having some structure and some systems throughout my day. So I made sure that I took the time to say, okay, now that I have all of this kind of room in my schedule, what do I need to put in place so that I'm beginning to have my mindset right for the day? I was taking time to do my self-care in the mornings, eating breakfast. Those little things really do make a difference. And then I will also spend my time with God. One of the beauties about the transition is that I'm able to have so much more time with him, and to really not have to rush or just kind of cram everything in. And so I started to spend more time, be very intentional about spending time with God, and it made such a difference. You guys know, if you watch my video, I have been journaling consistently for 90 days, and that really allowed me to get all of those thoughts out of my head. Because sometimes when you're going through those transitions and you're in a funk, you get attacked really bad in your mind. And so I learned the importance of practicing mind management on a daily basis, because I really had to fight for myself. I had to go to war against, the enemy trying to plant all those thoughts in my head. And even at night, as I was going to bed, I started going to bed at a regular time. When I didn't have as much structure, I was going to bed 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. I was binging Suits. If you know, you know. I actually just finished all 9 seasons in 2 months. So I binged. But I started going to bed at 10 o'clock because I wanted to start waking up earlier, and I would journal before I went to bed and kind of get off of my phone. And those things really helped me to start feeling like myself again. So another thing that I did was I started taking frequent social media breaks. The digital detox was so necessary, because whenever you're in a funk, social media and the things that you see can really kind of make or break you in that place. And I began to be filled with a lot of bitterness and frustration for my season, and it allowed so many negative thoughts to come in through my mind. So I was like, okay, I need to completely get off of social media. And even at that time, like, it was summertime, like we were entering into summertime when this happened. And so I was actually scheduled to go on my first trip to Mexico during that time. And I was like, God, how am I going to pay for this? Blah, blah, blah. God wound up coming through, and I had an amazing time. And during that entire time, I was just like, you know what, I'm going to get completely off of social media. And I noticed that my thoughts about myself began to change, my mindset about my situation. And sometimes it can be tempting to go on social media and to scroll and kind of disconnect from the world, but you're immersing yourself in so much digital noise. And if you're not already in a good mental place, like, anything can trigger you. So I highly recommend like getting off of social media. And one thing I did was I didn't just leave that space open. I began to fill that space with healthy outlets. So I started going to the library. I love to read, and so I started reading books. I would sit in my room and I would listen to just good music, jazz music, or find new songs. I spent a lot of time spending time with God and my family. So definitely recommend taking a digital detox. You would be so surprised how it just kind of resets your brain. Now, these things are, of course, in no particular order. Do them as you find the strength to. But one thing that has been very integral in me getting out of that kind of like sunken place, really bad mindset, was I started fasting. Now, I didn't have the strength to fast initially because I was going through so much mental warfare. It was a really frustrating season for me. But once I began to, change the way I was eating, I started leaving the house, I started working on those projects and, getting off of social media, I was in a much better mindset. And so I actually had the strength to go ahead and fast. And the fasting really brought me so much clarity and peace that I really needed. I had an understanding of why I was in this season, and that God has plans to prosper me and not to harm me. And I began to fight. And through fasting, I realized the season that I was in and all the warfare that I didn't necessarily understand what's going on. And so if you have not tried fasting in your journey to get out of that funk, even if you feel like you don't have the strength, pray for the strength, because there's so much that is attached to, that season of your life. And when you're vulnerable, the enemy can come in and you may not even see it. So I highly suggest fasting for strength. And if you want more details on fasting, let me know in the comments. I'd be happy to give you some advice or some tips or strategies if you've never fasted before. And I'm talking about biblical fasting, so abstaining from food and really just spending all of that time in God's presence and receiving strength and those type of things. So those are some of the things that I did. Again, I'll just go ahead and recap. Focus on what you can control and leave the rest in prayer. Take it day by day and literally begin to ask God what He wants you to accomplish for that day. If you feel those worries and those burdens and maybe comparison and envy coming up, lay those things down in prayer. And again, focus on what's in your hands and what you can do for that day. You don't have to be productive every single day. That's something that I had to remind myself. There were times where I was just feeling very heavy and I just did not have it in me, but I still tried to make sure I at least spent time with God, because I knew that was going to change the trajectory of my day. But every day does not have to be perfect, and you do not have to be super productive every day. Give yourself some grace as you're coming out of that funk. Again, get out of the house on a regular basis. Make sure that you go back to what helped you build your momentum in the first place. So if you're a type of person that you need structure, you need a routine, go ahead and start establishing one. It doesn't have to be really elaborate, but giving you something that allows you to have some structure in your day. And then lastly, but once you gain that strength, go ahead and fast so that you can begin to understand what season that you're in and what God is doing behind the scenes. It makes a huge difference in the way that you fight and you show up. So I hope this video has been helpful for you. Again, if you are in a funk and you are trying to get yourself out of that place, definitely go ahead and try the things that I mentioned in this video, and be reminded that it's not always going to be like this. This is a temporary season, and God is going to bring you up out of that place, and what you're going to walk into is better than whatever you felt like you lost or whatever you're beating yourself up about. Like, everything is going to work out. All things are working out for your good, and God loves you, and it's going to be okay. All right. I love you so much. If this video was helpful, make sure you hit the thumbs up and be sure to subscribe.